All right, thanks for coming back. This is an original story from Hidden Revenge Family, and it took a turn you truly didn't see coming. Let's get into it.
The humidity of a New York summer usually sticks to you like a bad memory, but inside the Gilded Lily, the air was filtered to a crisp, expensive chill that smelled of white lilies and $500 an hour floor wax. I stood at the mahogany entrance, my boots feeling a little too heavy on the polished marble. I wasn't wearing a gown. I was wearing a clean-pressed charcoal suit I'd bought for my transition out of the army. It was practical. It was professional. To my sister Vanessa, it was an insult. I'm Sarah Miller. To the United States Army, I was Captain Miller, a logistics officer who managed the movements of multi-million-dollar equipment across hostile terrain. I've coordinated airdrops in freezing rain and accounted for every nut and bolt in a motor pool of 300 vehicles. I know how things move, and more importantly, I know when the foundation of a structure is about to give way. But as I stood there scanning the room for my family, I wasn't an officer. I was just the plain younger sister who had spent the last decade in dusty barracks, while Vanessa was busy building her brand as a Manhattan socialite. I saw them at the center of the room. The lighting was staged to create a halo effect around the head table. Vanessa was draped in ivory silk, her blonde hair coiffed into a crown that cost more than my monthly housing allowance. Beside her sat Julian Croft, a man whose smile looked like it had been practiced in a mirror until the sincerity had been completely bleached out of it. My parents, Richard and Mary, were flanking them, nodding and laughing at everything Julian said, as if he were the second coming. "Sarah, you're, here?" Vanessa's voice cut through the hum of the jazz trio. She didn't stand up. She just tilted her head, her eyes doing a rapid clinical scan of my outfit. The disappointment on her face was so sharp, I could have felt it from across the room. "Landed 3 hours ago," I said, keeping my voice level, the same tone I used for briefing a colonel. I walked over and kissed my mother's cheek. She smelled of expensive gin and artificial regret. "You couldn't have worn something with a bit more sparkle, dear," my mother whispered, her hand lingering on my sleeve for a second too long, checking the fabric quality. Julian's parents are from the Westchester Crofts. They have certain expectations. "I'm here to celebrate my sister Mom, not to audition for a role in a soap opera," I replied. I pulled out a chair, but before I could sit, Vanessa's hand shot out palm flat on the linen. "Actually, Sarah, we need to talk about tomorrow," Vanessa said. She didn't look at me. She was busy adjusting the placement of a crystal water glass. "Julian and I have been looking at the final seating chart, and the professional photos are going to be very specific. The aesthetic is old-world elegance. We've invited the press from 2 different lifestyle magazines." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, the same feeling I got right before an IED report came over the radio. And Vanessa finally looked at me, her eyes cold as flint. "Your look doesn't really fit the frame, Sarah. You've spent too much time in the sun. Your hands are... well, look at them. You look like a laborer. And that Jeep you parked out front, the valet almost refused to touch it. It's an eyesore. Have you ever been the one who built the walls of a home, only to be told you're too unrefined to sit at the dinner table inside? Have you ever been the smartest person in the room but treated like the help because you don't fit the image they're trying to sell?" I looked down at my hands. They were calloused, yes. I'd worked on engines, carried crates, and held the hands of soldiers who were terrified. Those hands had done more in a week than Vanessa's had in 28 years. "I'm your sister Vanessa. I'm the maid of honor. I'm supposed to be standing right next to you." Was Vanessa corrected? She took a slow sip of her champagne, her engagement ring, a 4-carat emerald, flashing under the chandelier. "We've decided that Grace, Julian's cousin, will be stepping into that role. She has the right silhouette for the dress. It's better this way. You'd be uncomfortable anyway, all that attention, all those people who speak a different language than you." I turned to my father. Surely Richard Miller, the man who taught me how to read a compass, would say something. He was staring at his steak, meticulously cutting a piece of meat, as if his life depended on the precision of the slice. "Dad," he didn't look up. "Your sister has worked very hard on this, Sarah. It's her big day. We think it's best if you just take a back seat this time. Maybe don't come to the ceremony at all. We'll tell people you had an emergency call back to the base. It's a noble excuse. People will respect that." The betrayal didn't arrive with a scream. It arrived with the soft clink of a silver fork hitting a porcelain plate. I looked at the 3 of them, my mother, the enabler, my father, the coward, and my sister, the predator. They weren't protecting me. They were erasing me. I was a stain on their carefully curated life of leased luxury and borrowed prestige. Vanessa reached into her designer clutch and pulled out a $20 bill. It was crumpled out of place in this high-end room. She flicked it across the table. It landed in my lap. "Take a bus back to that little cabin of yours in the woods, Sarah," she said, her voice dropping into a venomous whisper meant only for me. "You don't belong here. You're just a reminder of the life we outgrew. We're in a different league now. Go play soldier somewhere else and let the adults handle the real world." I picked up the $20 bill. I didn't crumble it. I didn't throw it back. I folded it into a perfect triangle, a habit from the service, and tucked it into my breast pocket. My military training had taught me many things, but the most important one was this: never interrupt an enemy while they are making a mistake. Vanessa thought she was dismissing a poor relation. She had no idea she was looking at the woman who held the deed to every inch of ground she was standing on. "I understand," I said. My voice was as calm as the eye of a hurricane. I stood up, my back straight, my chin level. I didn't look at the champagne. I didn't look at the food I'd paid for. "Enjoy your dinner," I added, looking Julian Croft dead in the eye. He flinched, sensing for the first time that I wasn't the easy mark he'd assumed I was. I walked out of the Gilded Lily, the sound of my boots rhythmic and certain on the marble. I didn't look back at the gold-leaf doors or the laughing guests. I walked straight to my battered Jeep, the one Vanessa called an eyesore. I climbed inside, the smell of old leather and oil, more honest than anything I'd smelled inside that restaurant. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number that hadn't been used in years. It was a direct line to a law firm in downtown Manhattan, the kind of place where the partners didn't have billboards because their names were already on the legislation. "This is Sarah Miller," I said when the voice answered. "I need to activate the Elias clause on the Miller estate. Yes, effective immediately. I want a full audit of all leveraged assets, and I want the locks changed on the beach house by tomorrow morning. I'm coming home." The city lights blurred as I pulled into traffic, heading away from the glitter of Midtown. I felt a strange sense of peace. In the Army, we have a term for what I was about to do: tactical repositioning. Vanessa wanted me to disappear. Fine, I would disappear, but I was taking the foundation of her world with me. She thought I was poor because I didn't wear my wealth. She thought I was weak because I chose to serve. She was about to find out that the plain sister she'd just banned from her wedding was the only person standing between her and a $482,000 debt that was about to be called in. As the rain started to smear against my windshield, I touched the $20 bill in my pocket. It was the most expensive gift Vanessa would ever give. I drove toward the coast, my mind already running the numbers. I knew exactly where the cracks were in their story. I'd seen the notices hidden under a pile of junk mail at my parents' house last month. I'd seen the frantic way Julian looked at his phone whenever the bill came. They were drowning in a sea of credit, and they were using my silence as their life raft. I reached the gated entrance of the beach estate, the one my grandfather Elias had left to me in a secret trust, because he knew my father was a spendthrift, and my sister was a shark. I'd let them live there for 5 years, let them host their parties and their galas, because I wanted peace. I wanted to believe that if I was generous, they would eventually love me for more than what I could provide. But the $20 bill changed that. I pulled the Jeep into the long, winding driveway. The house was lit up, a lighthouse of arrogance overlooking the Atlantic. I sat there for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. I took out my laptop from the rucksack in the passenger seat and logged into the Vanguard Holdings portal. I watched the numbers on the screen, the assets, the titles, the signatures. My parents had been busy while I was overseas. They'd forged my name on a second mortgage to pay for this wedding. They'd gambled my inheritance on a power couple image that was rotting from the inside out. I didn't feel the sting of the slap my mother had given me years ago, or the weight of the chores they'd piled on me while Vanessa went to dance lessons. I just felt the cold, hard logic of a logistics officer. The supply line of their ego was about to be cut. I started typing the first of several emails. The first was to the catering company, the second to the florist, and the third to the hotel where the Westchester Crofts were currently sipping my wine. Vanessa wanted a wedding for the ages. I was going to make sure she got exactly what she deserved. By the time the sun began to peek over the horizon, the letters were sent, the accounts were frozen, and the poor sister was the only one who still had a place to call home. I walked out onto the deck, the salt air filling my lungs. The tide was coming in, relentless and powerful, washing away the footprints in the sand. Tomorrow was going to be a very long day for the Miller family, and for the first time in my life, I didn't have to brief anyone on the plan. I just had to wait for the first person to try to charge a bottle of champagne to a card that no longer existed. I looked at the $20 bill one last time before setting it on the railing. The wind caught it, spinning it out toward the dark water, a small, insignificant piece of paper that had finally served its purpose. I went inside to find my old uniform. If I was going to end a dynasty, I might as well be dressed for the occasion. The silence of the house wasn't empty anymore. It was full of the quiet, humming power of a trap that was finally ready to snap shut. The $20 bill felt like a jagged piece of glass in my pocket as I pulled the Jeep into the gravel driveway of my cabin. I didn't leave it on the railing for the wind to take. I brought it inside and smoothed it out on my scarred oak desk. In the Army, we have a saying, "Know your objective, but know your terrain better." Vanessa and my parents thought they were the ones holding the map. They thought I was a guest in their world, an auxiliary unit that had outlived its usefulness. But as I opened my ruggedized laptop and the screen's blue glow washed over the darkened room, I wasn't looking at wedding seating charts or floral arrangements. I was looking at the structural integrity of the Miller family legacy, and I was finding cracks that went all the way to the bedrock. For years, I'd been the one overseas managing supply lines that spanned continents. I had been the capable one, the one they could ignore because I never made a sound while I was fixing their mistakes. I had sent back chunks of my officers' pay to help with home repairs and emergency expenses that my mother described in frantic late-night emails. I never questioned it. I treated my family like a mission. You protect the perimeter, you support the troops, and you don't ask for a receipt for your loyalty. But the $20 bill sitting on my desk was a different kind of receipt. It was a receipt for 18 years of being a safety net for people who were currently trying to cut the ropes. I logged into the secure portal for Vanguard Holdings. To the public, Vanguard was an anonymous investment shell. To me, it was the culmination of everything my grandfather Elias had taught me before I enlisted. "Sarah," he'd said, "your father has a heart of gold but a head of steam. He'll spend every dime trying to look like a king while the castle is crumbling. You be the one who owns the ground." He had secretly deeded the Miller Beach estate to me when I turned 21, bypassing my father entirely. It was a Taunton trust, sealed and silent, intended to be a fortress I could retreat to after my service. I had let them live there, let them host their Manhattan socialite galas, because I wanted to believe that a roof over their heads was enough to buy a little peace. My fingers flew across the keys, running a forensic audit on the estate's title record. My pulse didn't spike. It settled into that low, rhythmic hum I used during high-stakes logistics briefings. Then I saw it. A recorded instrument from 3 years ago, a quitclaim deed. It purported to show that I, Sarah Miller, had transferred my 100% ownership of the beach house back to Richard and Mary Miller for the sum of $10. I leaned back at the air in the cabin, suddenly feeling thin. I hadn't been in the country 3 years ago. I was in a forward operating base in Poland, coordinating the movement of armored divisions. I pulled up the digital scan of the document. The signature at the bottom was a masterpiece of mimicry. It had the right slant, the right pressure on the S, but it was missing the tiny jagged tick I always put at the end of the R, a habit from signing 1,000 military manifests in the rain. They hadn't just banned me from a wedding. They had committed federal mortgage fraud. They had forged my name to leverage a $3 million property so they could fund Vanessa's old-world elegance and Julian Croft's tailored lifestyle. My parents hadn't just chosen Vanessa over me. They had decided I was a corpse they could harvest for parts, while I was still out there risking my life for the flag. Have you ever discovered that the people who were supposed to be your sanctuary were actually the ones dismantling your walls while you weren't looking? Have you ever realized that your independence was just a convenient excuse for them to rob you blind? I didn't call the police. In my world, you don't call for support until you've established the full extent of the enemy's position. I needed more. I navigated to the home security server I'd installed for them 5 years ago, a localized system they thought was just for checking the front door for Amazon packages. They didn't realize it had internal motion sensors and audio logs backed up to my private cloud. I scrolled back to the night they decided to uninvite me. The video loaded in high definition. The living room of the beach house, my house, looked like a movie set. Vanessa was lounging on the Italian leather sofa, swirling a glass of wine that probably cost more than my Jeep's monthly insurance. My mother was sitting next to her, patting her hand. "We just have to make sure she doesn't check the mail before the wedding," Vanessa's voice came through my speakers, sharp and brittle as a dried leaf. If she sees the foreclosure notice on the second mortgage, she'll blow the whole thing. Julian's parents are already asking questions about the Miller liquidity. She won't check, well, my father's voice rumbled from off-camera. He sounded tired, but it was the exhaustion of a man who had traded his spine for a comfortable chair. Sarah is focused on her mission. She's always been simple that way. She thinks as long as she has her boots in her cabin, she's fine. She doesn't understand that image is everything in this world. She's dead weight, Dad, Vanessa snapped, tossing her hair. She's an eyesore. I won't have the soldier girl in the background of my Vogue-style photos. We'll get the signature for the final asset transfer during the reception. We'll just tell her it's a standard tax form. She'll sign it without reading. She always handles the boring stuff for us anyway. I watched my mother laugh. It wasn't the warm laugh from my childhood. It was a cold, calculated sound, the sound of someone who had decided that one daughter was an investment and the other was just a resource to be depleted. I closed the video file. I didn't feel the sting of my mother's words or the weight of my father's cowardice. I felt the cold, clinical clarity of a captain who had just identified a massive breach in the perimeter. They thought I was the help. They thought I was a subscription service they could cancel after they'd milked the account dry. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and started a new column, liabilities. Beneath it, I listed the $800,000 defaulted loan, the forged signatures, the unauthorized spending, and the toxic debt Julian Croft was likely hiding from them. I spent the next 4 hours making calls to a different kind of unit. I called my accountant Philip, a man who spoke in numbers and never flinched at a decimal point. I called Victoria Sterling, a lawyer whose reputation was built on tearing down families who thought they were above the law. Sarah, Victoria said when she saw the documents I'd forwarded, this isn't just a civil dispute. This is a slaughterhouse. They've signed personal guarantees on these loans. If you pull the plug on the residency addendum, the bank will move for an immediate asset seizure. I don't want to just pull the plug, Victoria, I said, my voice echoing in the quiet of my cabin. I want to redirect the flow. I want them to think they're walking into a palace while I'm busy dismantling the foundations. They wanted me to be invisible, fine. I'll be the most expensive ghost they've ever met. I stayed up until the first hint of gray light touched the tops of the pines. By dawn, the Elias clause was active. The locks on my beach house were scheduled for a remote reset. The credit cards, the ones I had supplementary authority over because I was the one who funded them, were being flagged for a security review that would trigger the moment a transaction over $50 was attempted. I put on my old physical training shirt, the one with the faded Army logo. My hands were perfectly steady as I poured a cup of black coffee. The pain from the dinner was gone, replaced by the mechanical satisfaction of a plan coming together. Vanessa wanted a wedding that would make her proud. I was going to make sure it was an event that would be talked about for years, just not in the lifestyle magazines she'd invited. As I walked out onto my porch to watch the sunrise, I took the $20 bill from my pocket and tucked it into the frame of a photo of my grandfather. It wasn't a gift, and it wasn't a tip. It was the down payment on the demolition of the Miller dynasty. I had 48 hours until the ceremony, and in my world, that was more than enough time to reposition an entire army or a single poor sister who had finally learned the true value of her silence. The air in downtown Manhattan always feels like it's vibrating with the collective anxiety of people chasing a ghost, but my pulse stayed fixed at a steady 60 beats per minute as I stepped into the lobby of Sterling and Associates. I wasn't the girl in the dusty Jeep today. I was a logistics captain who had just identified a massive breach in my own supply line, and I was moving in to neutralize the threat with the cold surgical precision I'd used to move armored divisions across the desert. I'd spent a decade accounting for every single bullet and gallon of fuel in my unit. My parents and sister had spent that same decade assuming that because I didn't brag about my balance sheet, I didn't have one. Victoria Sterling's office sat on the 42nd floor, a space made of glass and silence that overlooked the very skyline I'd helped protect. When I walked in, she didn't offer me coffee or small talk. She simply turned her monitor toward me. On the screen was a digital map of my family's self-destruction, mapped out in red lines of debt and forged signatures. "The audit is complete, Sarah," Victoria said, her voice like a sharpened blade. "It's actually more impressive than I thought. Your father didn't just forge your name on the second mortgage for the beach house. He used your military power of attorney, the one you signed for emergencies before your deployment to Kabul, to list you as a personal guarantor for the Miller Group's operational loans. They didn't just take your house. They tied an $8.2 million anchor to your neck and threw you into the deep end. I leaned in, scanning the documents. In the Army, we call this a total asset compromise. My family had viewed my life as a secondary resource, a stockpile they could raid whenever their own greed ran dry. For 5 years, while I was sleeping in a bunk and managing the flow of heavy equipment, they were sipping my equity like fine wine. What about Julian Croft? I asked. I needed to know the strength of the enemy's reinforcement. Victoria's lip curled into a thin, clinical smile. That's the most poetic part of this mess. Julian Croft is a ghost. He's the son of Westchester Crofts. Yes, but the family wealth was liquidated a decade ago. He's currently operating 3 different Ponzi-style real estate schemes to keep up appearances. He isn't marrying Vanessa for her brand Sarah. He's marrying her because he thinks the Miller family is liquid. He thinks that beach house, your beach house, is the collateral that's going to save him from a federal fraud indictment. Have you ever been the only person in the room who knows the floor is made of glass? Watching the people who betrayed you dance with all their weight, completely oblivious to the fact that you're the one holding the only set of tools that can keep the structure from shattering. I felt a strange cold clarity. It was the same feeling you get when the GPS confirms you've successfully led a convoy into the target zone without being detected. My sister Vanessa had banned me from her wedding because I was an eyesore, a poor reminder of a life she'd outgrown. In her mind, I was the help. In reality, I was the only person in the world who could stop the sheriff from padlocking the doors of her reception. Execute the Vanguard buyout, I said. Victoria hit a series of keys. The debt purchase is initiated. By 4:00 p.m. today, Vanguard Holdings, your private entity, will officially own the second mortgage and the outstanding commercial notes for the Miller Group. You aren't their daughter anymore, Sarah. You're their primary creditor. You have the legal right to call in the full balance immediately upon any material breach of conduct. My phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Vanessa. Don't bother checking the mail today, Sarah. I've had all family correspondence redirected to my personal assistant. We don't want you getting confused by adult paperwork. Just stay in your little woods and stay out of our way. The wedding photos will look better without you. I didn't respond with a threat. I didn't even let my anger spike. I simply typed back, I understand perfectly, Vanessa. I've always been good at following orders. Enjoy your big day. It's going to be unforgettable. She thinks she's winning, Victoria remarked, watching me. In logistics, the most dangerous moment isn't when you're under fire, I replied, standing up and straightening my suit. It's when you think you've secured the perimeter, but you haven't accounted for the fact that the ground you're standing on has already been sold. I spent the afternoon in the war room Victoria had set up. We sent notices to the catering company, the florist, and the luxury car service, but we didn't cancel the orders. Instead, we updated the billing authorization. We moved the liability from the Miller Group's accounts, which were now frozen under a security review, I'd triggered through the Vanguard audit, directly onto my parents' personal names. Every orchid, every bottle of champagne, every silk napkin was now being charged to a card that my father didn't realize was being monitored for fraud. As the sun began to set over the Hudson, I walked down to the street level, my heels clicking rhythmically against the sidewalk. I felt a sense of peace that only comes with the finalization of a battle plan. I wasn't looking for an apology anymore. You don't ask for an apology from a termite that's eating your house. You just remove the wood. My parents had spent 18 years teaching me that I was the reliable one, the one who didn't need praise, the one who could be ignored, because I was too simple to care about the old-world elegance they craved. They'd forged my name because they thought my loyalty was a blank check they could never overdraw. They thought my service to the country was a character flaw that made me easy to manipulate. I hailed a cab and gave the driver the address of a high-end boutique in Soho. I had a different kind of uniform to pick up. Vanessa wanted a wedding that fit a specific frame. I was going to give it to her. I was going to show up to that beach house, but I wasn't coming as the sister who worked the land. I was coming as the officer who was reclaiming the base. The driver navigated through the gridlock, and I watched the people on the sidewalk, hundreds of lives moving in different directions, all of them assuming the foundations beneath them were solid. I thought about the $20 bill sitting in the frame back at my cabin. It was a small, flimsy piece of paper, but it had revealed the structural rot of my family, with more clarity than any audit ever could. When I reached the boutique, the seamstress was waiting with a garment bag. She opened it, and the midnight blue silk of the gown I'd ordered months ago caught the light. It was understated, powerful, and impeccably tailored, exactly the kind of thing a woman who owns the room wears when she doesn't need anyone to know her name. "It's perfect," I said, feeling the weight of the fabric. "Where is the event, Miss Miller?" the seamstress asked, smiling. "At my house," I replied, my voice steady. "But most of the guests don't know it's mine yet. I'm planning a surprise for the finale." I walked out into the New York night, the garment bag over my arm. The countdown had hit the 24-hour mark. Vanessa was likely at her final dress fitting, dreaming of a life of stolen luxury, unaware that the supply lines of her ego had been cut, and the fuel for her fantasy had already run out. Tomorrow the Miller family was going to have their wedding, but I was the one who was going to sign the closing documents. The silence was mine now, and it was the loudest thing in the city. The starch of my dress shirt felt like armor against my skin as I pulled the Jeep into the hidden service entrance of the Miller Beach estate. It was 600 hours. In the military, this was the time for the first sit rep of the day, a moment to ensure every asset was in place before the heat of the engagement. As I looked at the sprawling cedar and glass structure overlooking the Atlantic, I didn't see a family home. I saw a compromised objective. I saw a target that I had funded, maintained, and protected, which was now being used as the headquarters for a multi-layered fraud. I stepped out of the vehicle, my boots crunching on the gravel, the only honest sound in a day that was about to be defined by expensive, orchestrated lies. I didn't go to the front door. I didn't want the performance of the Plain Sister today. I walked straight to the management office located in the detached carriage house, a space my father used to work in, though his work mostly consisted of napping and ignoring debt collection calls. I used my master key, the one they had forgotten I held as the legal trustee of the Vanguard account. The room was cool and smelled of salt air and neglected filing cabinets. I sat at the monitor station I'd upgraded myself 3 deployments ago and began to cycle through the internal camera feeds. On the screen, the house was waking up. Vanessa was in the primary suite, my grandfather's suite, surrounded by a small army of hair and makeup artists. She was holding a mimosa, her face already a mask of entitlement. Through the high-fidelity audio feed, I heard her snapping at my mother about the placement of the Westchester Croft welcome baskets. My mother was fluttering around her, looking older and more frantic than she had at the rehearsal dinner. Every time she touched Vanessa's arm, Vanessa recoiled as if my mother were a carrier of some middle-class infection. Then Julian Croft entered the frame. He was already in his tuxedo, looking like a man who was about to inherit the world. He leaned in and whispered something to Vanessa that made her smile widen, that sharp predatory glint I had learned to identify in the desert. "The wire transfer from the escrow should hit by noon," Julian said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as synthetic. "Once we sign the residency addendum at the reception, the bank will release the final $400,000. We'll have the first-class tickets to the Maldives booked before the cake is cut." "And the parents?" Vanessa asked, her voice dropping into that casual coldness that still managed to sting. "We'll tell them the liquidity issues require them to move to the guest cottage by the end of the month," Julian replied, adjusting his cufflinks. "Once the title is fully in our name, we'll sell the whole lot. There's a developer in the city who doesn't care about family history, they just want the beachfront. Have you ever been the one who reinforced every load-bearing wall of a home, only to watch from the shadows as the people you sheltered measured the space for their own profit? Have you ever realized that your silence wasn't seen as kindness, but as an invitation for them to pick your pockets while you were still standing in the room?" I leaned back, the blue light of the monitors reflecting in my eyes. It was a classic pincer maneuver. My parents had stolen the house from me to give to Vanessa, and Julian was currently stealing it from all of them. They were sharks eating sharks, and they were doing it on my ground. I pulled up the Vanguard Holdings dashboard on my laptop. It was time to tighten the noose. I didn't need to shout to be heard. I just needed to interrupt the supply line. I navigated to the merchant services portal. For weeks, I had allowed the wedding expenses to accumulate on the Miller Group corporate cards that were now backed by Vanguard's debt purchase agreement. The catering bill was $65,000. The florist was $22,000. The orchestra, the luxury shuttle service, the security detail. It was all a house of cards built on a credit line I currently owned. I waited until the first catering truck pulled up to the main gate. I watched the driver step out, tablet in hand, ready to process the final delivery authorization. This was the trigger point. In logistics, if you cut the fuel at the source, the entire engine seizes. I hit the security freeze button on the primary account. A second later, the dashboard lit up with red alerts. Every card associated with the Miller name was now officially non-functional pending investigation. I watched the catering driver's face through the gate camera as his tablet flashed a rejection code. He tried it again, then he picked up his radio. Inside the house, the atmosphere began to shift. I saw my father, Richard, jogging toward the kitchen, his phone pressed to his ear. He looked like a man who had just realized the parachute he'd been wearing was actually a backpack full of rocks. "What do you mean declined?" I heard my father shouting through the kitchen audio feed. "It's a black card. Try it again. The bank is making a mistake." But the bank wasn't making a mistake. I was. I grabbed the garment bag containing my dress blues. I didn't feel the need to rush. I had spent my career moving heavy artillery and managing the survival of hundreds. Stopping a wedding was just another day at the office. I walked out of the carriage house and toward the main estate, the wind off the ocean picking up, carrying the scent of an incoming storm. The guests were starting to arrive, the Westchester Crofts, the social climbers, the people who only showed up when the champagne was free. They were dressed in linens and silks, laughing and posing for photos against a backdrop they didn't realize was already being liquidated. As I reached the side entrance of the kitchen, I saw the head caterer confronting my mother. The woman looked stressed, her arms folded tightly across her chest. "Ma'am, the authorization failed. For the food, the staff, everything. Unless we have a valid form of payment in the next 30 minutes, we're packing the trucks and leaving. My contract is very clear on that." "It's a glitch," my mother shrieked, her voice cracking. "My husband is on the phone with the bank right now. Just start the service. Think of the optics." "I don't get paid in optics," the caterer said, her voice flat. I stood in the doorway, my presence still unnoticed. I watched my mother's hands shake, the same hands that had forged my name on a deed. I watched the greed and the panic war for dominance on her face. They were so busy trying to maintain the frame of their perfect life that they couldn't see the glass was already shattered. I walked past them, my stride measured and heavy. The sound of my boots an intruder in the world of soft-souled luxury. I didn't stop to explain. I didn't stop to argue. I headed for the grand staircase, the heart of the house. Vanessa was at the top of the landing, her train trailing behind her like a white silk serpent. She saw me and her face twisted into a sneer. "I told you not to come, Sarah," she hissed, her voice vibrating with a frantic energy. "And look at you, you're still in that suit. You look like a funeral director. Get out before Julian's mother sees you." I stopped at the base of the stairs and looked up at her. She looked like a queen, but I could see the cracks in the crown. I could see the desperation in the way she gripped the railing. "I'm not here for the wedding, Vanessa," I said, my voice carrying that low, resonant frequency of a commanding officer. "I'm here for the audit." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "You're pathetic. Always talking about work, always talking about numbers. Just go back to your woods and stay there. We're moving into our real life now. This house, this legacy, it belongs to the winners." "The ground you're standing on has already been moved," I replied. The first of many sirens began to wail in the distance, a low rhythmic pulse that cut through the sound of the ocean waves. Vanessa froze, her eyes darting toward the window. The guests on the lawn began to murmur, their heads turning toward the driveway. I checked my watch. 1,400 hours, exactly on schedule. The trap wasn't just set, the floor was already beginning to drop. I felt the $20 bill in my pocket, a small wrinkled piece of paper that had finally triggered a landslide. The Miller family had spent years trying to make me disappear, but as the first blue and red lights began to strobe against the white walls of the foyer, they were the ones who were about to find out how it felt to be erased from their own story. The rhythmic, heavy thud of the front doors being opened by the sheriff's deputies was a percussion I'd been waiting for since the moment that $20 bill hit my lap at dinner. I stood at the base of the grand staircase, my spine a vertical line of tempered steel, the weight of the metals on my dress blues, feeling like a physical anchor. In the army, we talk about the fog of war, that chaotic moment where information is incomplete and every decision carries the weight of a life. But as I looked up at Vanessa perched on the landing like a broken porcelain doll, the fog was entirely gone. There was only the cold, clinical clarity of a logistics officer watching a supply line finally run dry. The ballroom was a sea of confusion. The Westchester Crofts and their circle of social climbers were clutching their champagne flutes, their eyes darting between the uniformed officers entering the foyer and the woman in the midnight blue military uniform, standing in the center of the room. The catering manager, a woman who had looked like she was on the verge of a stroke 10 minutes ago, was now standing near the kitchen doors. Her arms folded her trucks, already idling in the driveway to take back the food that hadn't been paid for. "Sarah," my mother gasped, stumbling toward me. She looked at my uniform. The rank insignia, the commendations for service in 3 different theaters, as if she were seeing a stranger. "What are you doing? Why are the police here? Tell them there's been a mistake with the accounts. Your father is on the phone, he's fixing it." "He isn't fixing anything, Mom," I said, my voice carrying that low-frequency resonance that commanded a motor pool of 300 men. "There is no mistake. The accounts aren't frozen because of a glitch. They're frozen because the primary guarantor, Vanguard Holdings, has called in the debt. And since I am Vanguard Holdings, I'm the one who pulled the plug." Have you ever sat through a family dinner where they talked about your future as if you weren't even in the room, only to realize you were the one holding the deeds to the very ground they were standing on? Have you ever been the plain one, the simple one, while the people who supposedly loved you were busy measuring your assets for their own greed? My father, Richard, finally emerged from the library, his phone still pressed to his ear, his face the color of old parchment. He stopped dead when he saw the deputies. He saw the lead officer holding a manila envelope, the one containing the forensic audit and the criminal complaint for mortgage fraud that I had authorized at dawn. "Richard Miller," the officer asked, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. I can explain," my father stammered, the phone slipping from his hand and hitting the marble floor with a plastic crack. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for the same silence I'd given him for 18 years. "Sarah, please. Not here, not in front of everyone. Think of the family name." "The family name was built on a foundation of Elias's hard work," I replied, stepping toward him. "You and Vanessa used it like a credit card with no limit. You didn't just spend my inheritance. You forged my signature to leverage this house. You stole my name while I was in a combat zone. You treated my service like a resource to be depleted, and then you had the audacity to call me an eyesore at my own table." Vanessa finally found her voice, though it was shrill and desperate, a far cry from the old-world elegance she had been practicing. "This is my wedding. You're ruining everything because you're jealous. You've always been the difficult one, the one who didn't fit in. Guards, get her out of here. She's trespassing." "Actually, Vanessa," I said, looking up at her, "you're the one trespassing. This house belongs to the Miller Family Trust, and as of 1600 hours yesterday, I am the sole trustee. The residency addendum that allowed you to live here was contingent on lawful and ethical conduct. Forgery and mortgage fraud tend to violate that clause." Julian Croft stepped forward, then his tuxedo fitting him like a second skin, but his smile was gone, replaced by a twitch at the corner of his mouth. "Look, Sarah, let's be reasonable. We're joining 2 prestigious families today. The Crofts have a reputation to maintain. Whatever financial discrepancies exist, we can handle them internally. There's no need for this theatricality." I turned my gaze to Julian. "The Crofts? You mean the family that liquidated their assets in 2014? The ones who are currently under investigation for 3 different Ponzi-style real estate developments? You didn't marry Vanessa for her brand, Julian. You married her because you thought the Miller estate was liquid. You thought this house was the collateral that would keep you out of federal prison. You two really are a perfect match, 2 ghosts trying to haunt a palace that belongs to someone else." The silence that followed was absolute. I could see the guests in the back rows beginning to retreat toward the exits, their phones out recording the implosion of the It couple of the season. The press Vanessa had invited were snapping photos, but they weren't for a lifestyle magazine. They were for the morning news. I reached into the breast pocket of my uniform and pulled out a small, perfect triangle of green paper. It was the $20 bill Vanessa had flicked at me in the restaurant. I walked to the head table, the one draped in silk and covered in $500 floral arrangements, and I set the bill down on a silver platter. "You told me to take the bus, Vanessa," I said, my voice echoing through the ballroom. "You told me that $20 was the price of my absence. Well, I used that $20 to pay for the gas in the lead patrol car that's idling in the driveway. Consider it my contribution to your new life." My mother started to sob, then a loud, ragged sound that used to make me want to fix the world for her. Now it just sounded like the squeal of a failing engine. My father was being led toward the foyer by 2 deputies, his hands being secured behind his back. He didn't look like a patriarch anymore. He looked like an old man who had gambled everything on a lie and finally pulled a losing card. "Wait!" Vanessa screamed, running down the stairs, her heavy silk train snagging on the railing, the fabric tearing with a sharp, dry sound that cut through the air. She didn't care about the dress anymore. She grabbed for my arm, her nails digging into the sleeve of my dress blues. "Sarah, you can't do this. You're my sister. You're supposed to protect me." I gently but firmly uncurled her fingers from my sleeve. "I've been protecting you for 18 years, Vanessa. I've been the safety net you never acknowledged and the foundation you never checked. But a logistics officer knows when a structure is beyond repair. You didn't want a sister at your wedding. You wanted a bankroll. You uninvited me because I didn't fit the frame. Well, the frame is gone, and so is the house." I looked at the lead officer and gave a single sharp nod. The authorization was complete. The Elias clause was in full effect. As the sirens began to wail louder outside, the guests began to scramble for their cars, and the caterers started hauling the crates of untouched lobster back to their trucks. I realized I didn't feel the weight of the betrayal anymore. I felt the lightness of the truth. I walked past my sister, past the shattered remains of her perfect day, and headed toward the door. I had a lot of work to do to restore the land my grandfather had loved, and for the first time in my life, I didn't need to ask anyone for permission to begin the demo. The metallic click of the ratchets on my father's wrists was a sound more final than any wedding vow ever spoken in that cathedral-like foyer. I stood at the center of the marble floor, the weight of my dress blues, and the medals on my chest feeling like a suit of armor that had finally served its purpose. In the Army, we are trained to identify a total system failure, the point where a structure is so compromised that salvage is no longer an option. As I watched my parents being read their Miranda rights by the lead IRS agent, a man who moved with the same tactical indifference I had seen in a dozen motor pools, I realized I wasn't looking at my family anymore. I was looking at a decommissioned unit. The chaos of the guests fleeing was a study in the physics of social climbing. The Westchester Crofts and the rest of the Manhattan elite didn't offer comfort or support. They moved toward the driveway like cockroaches in a kitchen when the lights are flicked on. They didn't want to be associated with a federal fraud investigation. Julian Crawford, the man who had just placed a ring on my sister's finger, was currently being pinned against a catering van. His tuxedo, a masterpiece of borrowed prestige, was smeared with mud and spilled champagne. He looked at me with a desperate silent plea for intervention, but I simply adjusted my cap. In my world, you don't rescue a soldier who has been fragging his own team. Vanessa was the only one still screaming. She had collapsed onto the bottom step of the grand staircase. Her white silk train snagged on the very railing I had paid to have restored. The fabric tore with a sharp, dry sound that echoed through the emptying ballroom. She looked up at me, her face a mask of ruined mascara and raw, unchecked hatred. "You monster," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This was my day. You took everything from me because you were always the jealous one. You were always the daughter we had to apologize for." I walked over to her, my boots rhythmic and heavy on the polished wood. I didn't lean down. I didn't give her the intimacy of a whisper. I stood at my full height, looking down at the woman who had spent 18 years treating my silence like a subscription service she could never overdraw. "I didn't take your day, Vanessa," I said, my voice carrying the low-frequency command of a captain on a firing range. "I just took my house back. And since I'm the one holding the deed, I'm the one who decides who stays in the frame." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the manila envelope Victoria Sterling had handed me earlier. I dropped it onto her lap. It contained the formal eviction notice, effective immediately. My parents, Richard and Mary, were currently being led toward the patrol cars. My mother didn't look at me. She kept her head down, her hands shielded by the jacket an officer had placed over her shoulders to hide the cuffs. My father, however, stopped at the door. He looked back at the foyer, at the sprawling estate that had been his kingdom of lies, and then at me. For a split second, I saw the man who had taught me how to read a compass. But then he looked at the police tape being strung across his front door, and the light in his eyes vanished. He realized the coordinates of his life had been permanently reset. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, the house was silent for the first time in years. The sirens had faded into the distance, taking my family with them. The only sound left was the rhythmic slapping of the Atlantic against the seawall. I walked out onto the deck, breathing in the salt air. It tasted like freedom, unpolluted by the scent of expensive perfume and artificial regret. Victoria Sterling walked out to join me, her heels clicking on the cedar planks. "The preliminary audit is done, Sarah," she said, tapping her tablet. "Vanguard Holdings officially has total control of the liquidated assets. We've frozen the secondary accounts Julian was trying to siphon. Your parents are facing 10 to 15 years for the forgery alone. The IRS is going to have a field day with the rest. What about the house? I asked. It's yours free and clear, Victoria replied. But the developers are already calling. You could sell it tomorrow for $4 million and never have to see this coast again. I looked out at the water. I thought about the little girl who used to hide in the carriage house to escape my mother's comparisons. I thought about the woman who had managed the flow of thousands of tons of equipment while my family was busy forging her name to pay for a lifestyle they hadn't earned. No, I said, a decision solidifying in my chest. I'm not selling, I'm repurposing. We're going to turn this place into the Elias Foundation. It's going to be a transitional housing facility for veterans who have been defrauded of their benefits or their homes by the people they trusted. This house was built on a foundation of service. It's time it started serving someone other than the Millers. 3 months later, the transformation was nearly complete. The silk drapes were gone, replaced by clean lines and functional furniture. The old-world elegance had been stripped away to reveal the sturdy, honest bones of the structure my grandfather had loved. I was sitting in the library, my library, when a courier arrived with a package. It was a letter from a federal prison in West Virginia. I opened it. It was from Vanessa. It wasn't an apology. It was a 3-page manifesto about how I had betrayed the bloodline, how she was suffering in a communal cell, and how she expected me to send her money for her commissary account. She mentioned that Julian had filed for an annulment from his own jail cell, claiming she had misled him about the family wealth. The irony was so thick, it was almost poetic. She ended the letter by telling me she was my sister, and that meant I owed her a future. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. I just felt the cold, hard logic of a logistics officer who had finally balanced the ledger. I walked over to the paper shredder in the corner and watched the pages disappear into thin, meaningless strips. For 28 years, I had believed that loyalty was a debt I had to pay. I had learned the hard way that blood makes you relatives, but character makes you family. I walked to the front door and stepped out onto the porch. A van was pulling into the driveway, the first group of residents for the foundation. 4 men and women who had served, who had sacrificed, and who had been left behind by a system that didn't know how to value their silence. I walked down the steps to meet them, my hand resting on the $20 bill I had framed and hung near the entrance. It was a reminder that every war has a cost and every betrayal has a receipt. As I shook the hand of a retired master sergeant who had lost everything to a predatory lender, I realized I had finally found the frame I belonged in. It didn't have crystal chandeliers or lifestyle magazine photographers. It just had truth, boundaries, and a foundation that would never collapse again. My parents had wanted me to be invisible so they could shine. They forgot that in the dark, it's the quiet ones who know how to find the way home. Do you think Sarah was right to refuse her family any form of leniency after the truth came out, or does the bond of blood mean she should have left them a way to rebuild? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories of quiet strength, tactical justice, and the moments when the truth finally calls the debt in full. Some people think disrespect is just a moment. A sharp word, a cold look, a small humiliation they expect you to swallow and forget. I learned something different. Disrespect is data. It is a message. And sometimes, it is a receipt. When Vanessa flicked that $20 bill across the dinner table, she thought she was ending a conversation. She thought she was shrinking me back into the role I'd always played, the quiet sister, the reliable one, the one who didn't make scenes. But in my world, every transaction leaves a record. Every movement of power leaves a trace. And that small, crumpled bill told me more about my family than any argument ever could. Because here's the first truth I learned. Respect is not what people say when it's convenient. Respect is how they treat you when they believe you have no leverage. When someone laughs at your work, dismisses your appearance, or treats your presence like an inconvenience, they are not having a bad day. They are showing you exactly where you stand in their hierarchy. And if you ignore that signal, you don't preserve peace, you volunteer for future harm. Many of us are taught to minimize these moments. Don't be sensitive. They didn't mean it. It's family. But love without respect is not love. It's control with better branding. The second lesson was harder. You cannot argue your way out of a role someone is determined to keep you in. I could have yelled at that table. I could have demanded an explanation, pleaded my worth, listed my achievements, reminded them of every sacrifice I'd made, and none of it would have mattered. Because once someone has decided who you are in their story, arguing only reinforces their power to define you. You become reactive, emotional, predictable, contained. Instead, I stayed quiet, not out of weakness, out of strategy. In the army, we say never interrupt an enemy while they're making a mistake. In life, the same applies. When someone shows you their intent, let them finish revealing it. Let the pattern complete itself. Because clarity is the most powerful weapon you will ever hold. Which brings me to the third lesson: emotions are valid. But systems solve problems. I was hurt, betrayed, humiliated. But feelings alone don't protect assets. They don't secure identities. They don't prevent exploitation. So I separated the two. Emotion told me something was wrong. Systems allowed me to prove it. And in everyday life, that looks like this. Don't sign documents when you feel pressured. Don't hand over passwords just to help. Don't mix financial access with emotional obligation. Don't ignore paperwork because they handle that stuff. Your name is your identity. Your signature is your authority. Your silence is not consent. You don't need to live in paranoia, but you do need to live awake. Because the people who exploit trust rarely look like villains. They look familiar, comfortable, safe. And that is exactly why boundaries matter most with them. Which leads to the fourth lesson: boundaries are not walls, they are gates, and you control the key. Many people think setting boundaries is cruel, selfish, dramatic, disrespectful, but a boundary is simply a statement of jurisdiction. This area is mine. This decision requires my consent. This behavior is not acceptable to me. You do not need permission to set a boundary. You only need the courage to enforce it. Simple phrases change lives. That doesn't work for me. I need that in writing. I'm not available for that. I can help, but I can't take responsibility for it. Boundaries don't destroy relationships. They reveal which ones were real to begin with. And finally, the lesson that reshaped everything: disrespect is never small. It is an early warning system. It starts with jokes, dismissals, tiny exclusions, little humiliations you're told to laugh off. But small signals become big consequences when ignored. A person who belittles you today may exploit you tomorrow. A family that erases your presence socially may erase your name legally. A partner who ignores your discomfort may ignore your consent later. The body notices before the mind accepts. That tightness in your chest, that hesitation before answering their calls, that instinct to check what they're doing twice. Those are not weaknesses. They are intelligence. So here's the advice I leave you with. If someone hands you disrespect, don't rush to throw it back. Look at it. Study it. Ask yourself, what does this reveal about my position in their world? Because sometimes what feels like humiliation is actually information. And once you see clearly, you don't need to fight loudly. You simply reposition. Quietly, decisively, irreversibly. Some people think disrespect is just a moment, but if you listen closely, it might just be the receipt that proves you were never safe there to begin with. Most people think betrayal happens suddenly, a dramatic argument, a shocking confession, a door slammed in anger. But real betrayal is quieter than that. It happens in casual conversations, in shared passwords, in "don't worry, I'll handle it for you," in documents you sign without reading because you trust the person smiling across the table. I didn't lose trust in my family all at once. I lost it line by line, signature by signature, assumption by assumption, and when I finally saw the full picture, I understood something that changed my life. You don't need to be rich to be targeted. You only need to be reliable. Reliable people get used. Quiet people get overlooked. Helpful people get assigned responsibilities no one else wants until those responsibilities become liabilities. So part 2 is about building a perimeter, not emotional armor, not paranoia, a perimeter of structure, rules, systems, clarity. Because peace isn't just a feeling. Peace is a design. The first lesson in building that design is this. Your most valuable asset is your name. Your name opens bank accounts, signs contracts, owns property, carries debt, builds or destroys your credit, determines your legal identity. In my story, my family didn't just betray me emotionally. They weaponized my name. They signed it where I never stood. They tied it to debts I never agreed to. They assumed my identity was communal property. And in real life, this happens more often than people realize. A parent co-signs something for convenience. A partner opens an account to help manage things. A sibling asks for a signature just to speed it up. Here is the rule: help is an action, access is a privilege. You can care about someone without giving them control over your identity. You can support someone without attaching your name to their risk. Simple safeguards change everything. Keep your important documents in your possession. Use strong, unique passwords. Turn on two-factor authentication. Check your credit or financial statements regularly. Never sign anything you haven't read fully, even for family. This isn't mistrust. This is adulthood. The second lesson, do not confuse kindness with unlimited access. Many people are raised to believe that saying no to family is betrayal. That love means availability without limits. That loyalty means signing whatever is placed in front of you. But unconditional access is not love. It is an invitation for dependency or exploitation. You are allowed to say, I can help, but I cannot co-sign. I can support you emotionally, but I cannot lend money. I trust you, but I still need to read the document. If someone becomes offended by reasonable safeguards, that tells you everything you need to know about their intentions. Because people who respect you do not fear your boundaries. Only those who benefit from your lack of them do. The third lesson is the most practical. When something is wrong, stop the leak before you start the conversation. Most people reverse the order. They argue first, they accuse, they cry, they demand explanations. And while the emotional storm rages, the damage continues. Money keeps leaving accounts, debts keep compounding, decisions keep being made without you. In logistics, when a supply line is compromised, you don't start a debate. You cut the flow, you secure the perimeter, then you assess. In real life, that means cancel automatic payments if something feels off. Change passwords if access feels unclear. Separate shared accounts when trust is broken. Document communication. Seek professional advice early. Then and only then have the emotional conversation. This single principle prevents most long-term disasters. Secure first, discuss second. The fourth lesson is about something deeper. Most people don't lack strength. They lack structure. They have instincts. They feel discomfort. They sense exploitation. But they don't have a system to act on it, so they override themselves and stay stuck. So here's a tool you can use. Create a simple life ledger. Column 1, what or who drains me? Column 2, what does it cost me money? Time, peace, dignity. Column 3, what boundary or change would reduce that cost? No drama, no revenge. Just clarity, because once you see your life as a balance sheet, you stop giving unlimited credit to people who never intend to repay it. And finally, the lesson that ties it all together. Your silence is not consent. If you didn't agree, it's not agreement. If you weren't informed, it's not consent. If you felt pressured, it's not a fair deal. People count on your discomfort with confrontation. They count on your habit of staying quiet. They count on you choosing harmony over clarity. But silence protects them, not you. So speak when something matters. Ask questions when something feels rushed. Demand written confirmation when something affects your future. You don't need to be aggressive. You only need to be clear. Because the strongest perimeter isn't built with anger. It's built with awareness, preparation, and the quiet confidence of someone who knows. No one gets to control my life just because I didn't say no fast enough. Protect your name, protect your money, protect your peace. Everything else can be rebuilt. There is a moment after every collapse when the noise stops, after the arguments, after the accusations, after the doors close, and the consequences begin. In that silence, one question always remains. Was I too harsh, or was I finally honest? Many people fear enforcing boundaries because they worry it will turn them into the villain of someone else's story. But here's the truth I learned the hard way. You are not responsible for protecting the comfort of people who harmed you. You are only responsible for telling the truth of your own life. The first lesson in rebuilding is understanding the difference between mercy and enabling. Mercy says, I acknowledge your humanity, but you face the results of your actions. Enabling says, I absorb your consequences, so you never have to change. For years, I enabled. I paid. I excused. I stayed quiet. I accepted being minimized because it kept the peace. But peace that requires your disappearance is not peace. It is slow self-erasure. So when the truth surfaced, I didn't soften the outcome. I didn't hide evidence. I didn't negotiate my own boundaries. I allowed reality to do what reality always does, settle the debt. And that leads to the second lesson. Justice does not require cruelty. It requires clarity. I didn't scream. I didn't insult. I didn't seek emotional revenge. I presented facts, documents, signatures, timelines, consequences. In life, when you must confront betrayal, focus on behavior, not character assassination. Not your evil. But you did this. This is the impact. This is the boundary now. This keeps your power clean, your conscience clear, your future free. Because when you stay factual, no one can rewrite you as unstable or vindictive. You become undeniable. The third lesson is the one most people need permission to accept. You are allowed to walk away from family. Blood creates relation, not obligation. If someone repeatedly violates your trust, exploits your resources, or demeans your existence shared, DNA does not sanctify that behavior. Tradition does not justify harm. History does not excuse abuse. Leaving is not betrayal. Staying in harm is self-betrayal. And when you finally choose yourself, guilt will try to drag you back. They're still your parents. She's still your sister. You'll regret this one day. But boundaries do not erase compassion. They simply say, I will not destroy myself to save you from facing yourself. The fourth lesson is where rebuilding truly begins. Do not rebuild the same structure that collapsed. It's tempting to restore what was lost, to recreate the old life, to prove you can survive it. But growth means asking, what would I build if I stopped trying to earn belonging in my story? The house that once symbolized stolen prestige became a foundation for people who had been robbed of stability by others they trusted. The site of exploitation became a site of restoration. In real life, rebuilding might look like a career chosen for fulfillment, not approval. A home that feels safe, not performative. Friendships built on mutual respect. Financial independence that requires no permission. You don't just recover, you redesign. And the final lesson, the one that makes all the others possible, do not become what hurt you. Power changes people. Pain sharpens instincts. Victory tempts ego. It would have been easy to humiliate, to mock, to savor revenge, to replace their cruelty with mine. But real strength is quieter. It is knowing you could destroy someone and choosing instead to simply step beyond their reach. It is refusing to repeat the cycle, refusing to use people as tools, refusing to demand worship as proof of worth. Because the goal was never to win against them. The goal was to become someone they could never control again. So here is my final advice to you. If you are the quiet one in your family, the dependable one at your job, the understanding one in your relationships, remember this: silence is a survival skill, but voice is a liberation skill. Boundaries are not punishment. They are self-respect made visible, and walking away from harm is not cruelty. It is courage. You are allowed to protect yourself. Even from people who once had your trust, even from people who share your name, because in the end, the strongest rebuild is not a house, not a career, not even a victory. It is a life where no one holds your dignity hostage again.
Final note. This story is a work of fiction created by artificial intelligence to heighten drama and emotion. But the valuable lessons we discuss are entirely real and continue to happen to many people every day. If this style isn't for you, that's perfectly okay. Please feel free to look for other content that better suits your needs.